The clickers are some of, dare I use this word, the most beloved cordyceps, zombies, cordyceps infected. There's no original resemblance to their human form anymore. It's about a year after the bite.
Do they look like crocodiles?
This is where you see the big thing coming out of their head. You can only see the bottom third of their face. They don't have vision anymore. So they use echolocation to get around, which is why they literally are clickers.
Three, two, one, punch it.
Could you jump to light speed in that tin can? Go back in time in a DeLorean. Will it crash or take to the sky? Tell me, smart guy, does it fly?
Welcome to Does It Fly? The podcast that puts your favorite sci-fi properties, inventions, and conceits to the test. I'm your mad scientist, Hakeem Oluseyi.
And I'm your pop culture expert, Tamara Krinsky. Time to dive into today's topic and see, does it fly? Hakeem.
Look, I'm excuse me today. There's something, I had truffles last night and my brain is starting to itch. So I'm not so sure how this is going to go today, but
I don't know. I'm
here for it.
I'm
How's
starting
your
to
brain
see
doing?
I'm starting to see some tendrils emerging.
Those are my eyelashes. Listen, y'all. Welcome back to Does It Fly? Because it's about to fly.
This is the podcast where we talk about the science and the story behind your favorite sci-fi, fantasy, and some might say horror films and TV shows, which is very applicable this week because we are going to be talking about the TV series The Last of Us.
So let me ask you a question. I know we're in our intro right now, but something just occurred to me, and it's how people use the word lie. When I use the word lie, I think it means you're trying to deceive. So when you're a story writer and you want to bring people in and believe your story, does that make you a liar?
I guess it could if you look at it that way.
Anyway, the lie we're talking about today is humans being infected by the Cordyceps fungus and becoming living zombies.
That's right. So for those who may not be familiar with The Last of Us, and for those of us who are, well, first, if you are and you don't want spoilers going forward, this is the time to press pause, go off, watch The Last of Us, come back, unpause, and listen to our conversation. For those for whom it's been a minute since you've either played the game or watched the TV show, or maybe just need a little refresher, The Last of Us is a 2023 TV series. It is based on the video game of the same name, and it is set in a post-apocalyptic United States and world where a fungus among us has decimated the population called Cordyceps. We'll get into an explanation of that in a little bit. And basically the world as we know it has ceased to exist. We are living in a future where society is completely broken down because of this infestation. And sometimes when people talk about this show, they talk about it as a zombie show. But if you actually, just to set the record straight from the very beginning, it's actually not a zombie show. And if you listen to the dialogue, if you read or listen to any of the interviews from the creators of it, it is a show about those who have been infected, which is different than a zombie. And that is purposeful. So I see your face. All right, we'll get to that.
There are zombie scenarios that revolve around infections, though. But continue.
Okay. Well, this is how they posit it. So, and so the series was created by Neil Druckmann and Craig Mazin. Neil Druckmann was actually one of the original creators of the game, stayed very involved in the show. And it is very much true to a lot of the things that happen in the game. And of course, there are things that are expanded. We're going to be focusing our conversation on the TV series. So that's where we'll be focusing. And today we're specifically talking about this idea of cordyceps and a fungal infection. So do you want to explain what that is to orient people from the beginning?
Yes. So cordyceps is a real life fungus. And this fungus can be found in the jungles of Southeast Asia. And it has a parasitic relationship with ants. So if you're going to parasiticize any animal,
Did you just make that word up?
I love making up words. Communication is about taking the idea from my mind to your mind, right? And so I love to turn vowels into verbs. So what happens is, this is very, very complex the way this takes place. So these ants, they typically live in a canopy of the trees in this rainforest. But from time to time, they have to go to the ground. And when they go to the ground, they can come in contact with cordyceps spores. And these spores attach themselves to the bodies of the ants and using chemicals and mechanical ways get inside the ant and can live there for like a week or so with the ant showing no outward signs of infection. But then on a certain day, the ant will climb down the tree, will find a leaf of a particular height above the ground, bite down on the central vein of the leaf with its mandibles, and just stay there. And here's what's so crazy about it. Scientists have studied which leaves they choose. And it turns out that when they studied these ants, 98% of them, when they bit the leaf, it was always on the central vein. They were always within a particular range of the ground, a tight range. They were always within the same temperature range, and they were always within the same humidity range. So the cordyceps fungus takes over the mind of the ant and makes it go to the ideal location for the fungus to grow and spread its spores. And that's exactly what happens. Once the ant makes it to the underside of the leaf, the tendril comes out of its head, its neck, its body, and this bulb pops open, and there are the spores, and the process starts all over again.
Could you get some of these cordyceps to come and take care of the temperature control and the environment in my house? Because it sounds like they're really good at making sure things stay premium temperature, exactly what you need for survival. I could use that at my house.
Yeah, if you and your family, everybody like snort a line or two of cordyceps spores and let it take over your brain, it'll take you right to the thermostat. Must reproduce. And then, and then it pops out of your head.
Oh my God, it's disgusting. Like I've watched some of these videos online and they're gross. And I was familiar with cordyceps before The Last of Us because there's actually a wonderful book called The Girl with All the Gifts. And it is a similar premise, very different manifestation of it, of how cordyceps take over humans. But I was familiar with it. So when I heard about The Last of Us, I was like, wait, why? What is like the trendy thing about ants and fungus? But
because what happens is what happens. Right. If you think about how many ants there are, and if each spore gets one ant or one life form to attach itself to, you want to have a life form that's incredibly abundant. And the ants are that. And not only that, they provide the right conditions for their growth.
Right. No, I'm sorry. I should have said that wrong. I didn't mean so much about the ants, but the extrapolation of this idea to a cordyceps takeover of humans. Right. And that's actually what we're going to be talking about today, right? Yes. The idea, does the idea that cordyceps, a fungal infection, could take over humans and gain control, does that fly? Does it fly scientifically? Does it fly for the story? Does it fly for the vibes?
Okay, well, let's get into the science. So let's look at the elements, just the two basic elements. Does mind control or do mind control fungi exist? Yes. Parasitic mind-controlled fungi. Yes, they do exist. 2, are humans susceptible to fungal infection? Again, the answer is yes. So let's look at 2. There is ringworm. Another one is candida, right? These are on your skin. But internally, it gets much more difficult because we have these amazing immune systems that keep us clean of fungus taking over inside unless you have a suppressed immune system. So if you have leukemia or you're undergoing some sort of immunosuppressant drugs, then you can get infected with fungi that otherwise would not infect you. Because cordyceps falls into that category. It is an otherwise would not infect you. They point out that it's because of our body temperature that cordyceps cannot live inside of us.
True, fungi cannot survive if its host's internal temperature is over 94 degrees. And currently, there are no reasons for fungi to evolve to be able to withstand higher temperatures. But what if that were to change? What if, for instance, the world were to get slightly warmer?
But due to global warming, it begins to adapt to warmer temperatures. And so it evolves such that it can actually infect human beings. So the question is, could that happen? And if that did happen, could it lead to a worldwide pandemic? So if it does, what do you do? Because, spores are everywhere all the damn time. It's hard to avoid spores.
It is. Although what's interesting about The Last of Us is that is one of the main changes that they made between the video game and between the TV show. So the video game, it's a spore infection. That's how it's carried, just like you were describing with the ants before. But in the TV show, they specifically changed it so that it is something that you become infected not through spores, but you become infected through a bite or through a blood exchange. And part of the reason that they did that was for production, because spores they're harder to see. They have to be a special effect.
Don't they?
And on top of that, it's just less active. Whereas if you're taking a chomp out of something, you get your action scene.
Isn't there a point in the movie when people are they've been infected for a long time, they've turned into a big that they poof and release spores? Isn't that a thing?
There's definitely some poofing that happens, but you have to have
all right.
You have to have basically an open sore or a wound. It's not like when you receive a dry spore. Yeah. So basically, bites and blood. That
reminds me of one of my childhood bucket list items. I know everybody wants to do this. You want to save a friend or family member from a snake bite by cutting the snake bite and sucking the venom out. Right? We saw that in movies as a kid. You're like, yeah, I want to do that. You ever thought that? Well, anyway, everybody listen.
I do not want to do that. That is what I thought. I absolutely, definitely do not want to do that. Call me Indy. I am not a fan of snakes. That would be Indiana Jones for those of you not familiar.
Well, I saw a little video about why you don't want to do that. And one of the reasons is if you have a cavity. I'm right. Yeah, you're right. If you have a cavity or a cut in your mouth, now the venom is inside of you. So it's a bad thing. Just like with the taking a bite out of a zombie and putting a spore in your wound.
Yeah, no, stay away. You should just keep most things away from open wounds.
Right, exactly. Could humans become infected with this particular thing like the ants have? So that's a very interesting question. And the thing that is weird about it in the movie is the rapidity with which it occurs. Not only does it spread throughout humanity rapidly, it basically takes over so fast. Once we can get infected, it just spreads like wildfire, takes out civilization. Well, it turns out for cordyceps to adapt to infect ants the way it does and have them go through these very specific behaviors, that process of natural evolution took 40 million years.
It happens to the humans a lot faster than that.
Yeah, maybe 40 million nanoseconds. No, milliseconds. What's 1 millionth? Microseconds.
Microseconds. Right? There we go. Yeah.
If something like that does occur, you're going to see it begin to occur. So it's just like when we have these new viruses that appear somewhere in the world, you get these notifications. Oh, there's something outbreaking over there in this particular location in some foreign nation. And, it's been held there. So we have that with Ebola, right? We have that with the H1N1 flu virus. We had that with COVID, right? You see it breaking out over there, but can it break out and spread? Well, a respiratory virus is a very different thing, right? They're made to rapidly adapt like that. They do it annually. That's why we get a flu shot, right?
And by respiratory, just to, clarify, you mean something that is spread through droplets in the air or particles in the air that we breathe in.
Exactly. And it also has a high virility, right? The probability of it infecting you and the number of viral grains necessary for it to infect you. These respiratory infections, they're made to infect you. They're not, they're fast evolving, they're fast infecting, they're fast spreading.
Yeah.
Fungal infections don't work that way, right? And there needs to be some time for this parasitic relationship to evolve, right? Parasitic relationships don't just happen. That's a big problem to overcome. So if you look at the actual infectious disease experts, because when the show came out, it was so influential and it was so popular that a lot of infectious disease experts spoke on it. And they basically said, we'd see this coming from, a light year away, and we would find countermeasures to slow it down and stop it and isolate it, right? And so that's exactly the approach that ants do, right? So these ants have been evolving along with these fungi, and so they have sets of controls themselves, right? They groom each other to keep each other clean of any spores that might be on each other. If someone does appear to be infected, they throw them out of the nest. If they find a dead body in a nest, they get rid of that, right? But, because of time being so deep, right? 40 million years is a long time to co-evolve.
Long time. That's, yeah. To develop some defenses.
Yeah, even if it's like a tiny probability or percentage, given 40 million years, it's going to come to fruition. But the ants don't have the medical establishment that we do.
Can this happen then? What is your answer on, does a cordyceps infestation of humans fly?
Well, it depends on how you phrase the question. A cordyceps infection of humans could, over time, is something that could potentially occur, right? But a cordyceps apocalypse does not seem like a likely outcome at all. And according to the experts, a cordyceps zombie apocalypse does not fly.
You know what? I'm relieved to hear you say that. Like, I love hearing you say that because I think that the storytellers in this case do such a great job of storytelling that I leave this show going, oh my God, this could totally fly.
Same.
So I am personally very, very relieved to hear you say this. So full admission, I think most of you guys know by now, if you're new to the podcast, this will be news. I'm a total geek, but I'm not in any way, shape, or form a gaming person. I don't play video games. And so, obviously I'd heard of the series. I was not in a rush to watch it because I didn't have that, nostalgic tie to the game. I ended up watching this because I knew, I was prepping to do the show. So I ended up watching it in the midst of the aftermath of the LA fires at the beginning of 2025. And you don't really want to be watching a movie about a dystopian apocalyptic future as you are watching things burn around you. I mean, luckily I was safe. I live in a spot in LA that was about, the two big fires were each about 45 minutes on either side of me. So, thank goodness I was safe. But friends of mine were not, and were losing all of their belongings and evacuating and housing and, thinking about like losing all of your possessions. So that was the context in which I actually watched this show, which was kind of crazy. But as I'm watching it, I was not necessarily looking forward to it because also some of you may know I'm not really a horror fan. And that was kind of how this show was posited to me.
Right.
And I just have to say that this show is about so much more than the infected. The way that they manifest this fungal infection, it's the way that I got an image of it in my mind and got
same. I made the face like, ew.
It's the way that they manifest it. It's in the incredible actors that they've got. I mean, the two main characters are played by Pedro Pascal, who plays Joel, and Bella Ramsey, who plays Ellie. Basically, Joel plays sort of the big survivor character who ends up having to ferry Ellie, who is a teenager, to a research facility that members of the rebellion have put together during this time of dystopia, because they're hoping that they can essentially create a vaccine based on Ellie's blood, etc., because she seems to be immune to the cordyceps infection.
She's infected, but it's not spreading and killing her.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there are so many ways in which they make this story real to us and make me believe in this world. And that's, God, as a sci-fi fan, that is all that I really want, to become immersed in this world. So it starts with, they structure the story where in the first couple of episodes, you have some flashbacks and some explanation of how this thing happened. And so that's where they talk about what you mentioned before, where, they tie it to climate change in a rapidly heating world, and why there was that adaptation for the cordyceps to be able to exist in humans where it hadn't before. They also talk about the idea that part of the reason that it spread so quickly was because basically the food supply got contaminated, and our food across the world is now produced by just a few big producers. So everybody, basically, there was a bad batch that went out. Everybody got it all at once. And for me, there was just enough. Whether that could happen scientifically, I see you shaking your head. You can't tell this if you're listening. Hakeem is shaking his head and giving me the look.
Nah.
But for me, again, like the what if of it, I totally resonated with, our food supply is definitely dominated by a few big industrial players. So the idea that something could get contaminated and spread, again, I don't know about the fungal details, but that made my brain go, yep, I buy into that. They've given me enough here to go on this what if journey. And then there's another scene. One of the things that I love, again, and the way they've structured this, is that Joel, who I think they say at one point he says he's like 54-ish maybe. He remembers the before times, because the main action of the series takes place in 2023. They did that on purpose because they wanted it to be the year that the TV show came out. And the breakdown, the massive infection happened 20 years before. So Joel is old enough to remember the before times and be able to talk about that with Ellie sometimes. Ellie comes in and in a lot of ways is the audience's eyes and ears as she has questions about how this all happened. And so sometimes you have conversations between the two of them about that as he explains all of this.
If you have to get bit to be infected, then who bit the first person? Was it a monkey? I bet it was a monkey.
It wasn't a monkey. I thought you went to school.
Federal school? Teaches how their shitty government failed to prevent a pandemic.
Another thing that I think really helps to sell this idea is there's a very clear stage sort of lifespan of the cordyceps infection. And that is really part of the fun of what you're watching on screen. So, it starts with runners. This happens pretty soon after you are bit, or you absorb a spore into your blood, however you've gotten infected. And literally their main purpose is to run and infect other people. So here they come.
Not those slow zombies. These are fast runners.
Not the slow zombies. These are fast. Their hair becomes a little thinner. You start to see some evidence of these, fungal tendrils coming out of their extremities. Then they turn into stalkers. This is after a couple of weeks. They still kind of resemble their original human. Then you go from stalker to clicker. And the clickers are some of, dare I use this word, the most beloved cordyceps zombies, cordyceps infected. There's no original resemblance to their human form anymore. It's about a year after the bite.
Do they look like crocodiles?
This is where you see the big thing coming out of their head.
Yeah.
And what's so cool about this, and the way this then feeds the narrative, feeds the action scenes, is that for clickers, you can only see the bottom third of their face. They don't have vision anymore. So they use echolocation to get around, which is why they literally are clickers. And then kind of the final stage, which happens, after a bunch of years, is you get a bloater. And a bloater is where you've had like a big takeover of your entire body. and they're completely blind. And they are more durable to traditional weapons, and they're kind of nasty. There's also just in the game, there's a Rat King stage. We have not seen this. But I have to give props to the makeup department.
Wait a minute. Props.
I didn't even mean to do that pun. I guess I better brush up on my wordplay here.
Oh my goodness. All right. You're going to brush up on your props for the makeup.
I'm going to have to cover up my sense of humor, aren't I? Here's another makeup joke for you.
Wait, speaking of...
I'm building a foundation here for us.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm done.
Is it all done? Is it done?
Am I mascaring you?
Have you been infected? Is that what's going on here? You've been...
I'm so sorry. The makeup design, I should actually say the makeup designer. Yeah, makeup designer and visual effects artist, Barry Gower, who and who also worked with Craig Mazin, one of the creators of the show.
Talk about creating worlds.
On Chernobyl, where you also had humans experiencing various stages of decay. So one thing that they were able, like a process they were able to take from Chernobyl and kind of transpose onto The Last of Us was this idea of these different stages of infection. And so, there's a great interview with him where he talks about all of the different things that they were inspired by. And they looked at real world fungi. They looked at all these different kinds of mushrooms. They looked at a garden. And so I actually am very unfortunately familiar with leaf miners, which are what screw up my cucumbers. They're so bleep annoying. I bleeped myself. Anyway.
Fungi, listen, I love fungi, right?
Fungi are
the
amazing.
idea that they looked at a bunch of fungi. One of my favorites is called devil's fingers or something like that. It's 5 tendrils that are like red and got this black ooey goo on them. Yeah, don't want that popping out of your head, out of your face.
No, you definitely do not want that popping out of your head. For sure not. So total props to the makeup department, to the special effects department. There was a really good marriage on this show of special effects, makeup, visual effects, because you would have situations where, like, for example, I want to say it's episode 5, where there is a major scene with the infected and there's a fire and there's burning and zombies and cars and things like that. One of the things that was interesting was because that particular scene, there was low light, there were clickers in there, and they were able to attach the sort of clicker headgear, this big fungal headpiece, with Velcro. And normally for clickers, it would go over their eyes. But because it was low light, they didn't actually have to block their eyes. So the stunt people could see what they were doing, which is a hell of a lot easier, as you would imagine. And then and that made filming a lot easier. And then in post, they added in the stuff over their eyes. So, there was really great cooperation between all the different departments to make these scenes as vibrant, as interesting, as safe as possible.
And they succeeded.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, when we were asked to talk about this by our producers, I thought to myself, like, man, can they choose a show that sucks? Because whether the science flies or not, I feel like every episode I'm like, oh my God, I love this one. And, that's how I feel about The Last of Us. I loved it. I was aware of the video game. Mm-hmm. I had seen talk of The Last of Us, but I really had never, in scenes of the game, but I had never gotten deep into the story. And so I was eager to see the show. And when I saw it, it was one of those, I must consume this as quickly as possible. I love it.
Yeah, I honestly felt that way too. It just, it was a world, I'm not going to say I was happy to be immersed in, but it was a world that was full and realized and made sense while you were in it. And I just, like the things that they play out within are oftentimes really beautiful, which is not something that you often say about, what is perceived as like a zombie or a horror TV show. So I have to say that for me, the Cordyceps infection of the humans in The Last of Us absolutely flies. I just don't want it flying anywhere near me.
Right. No. No. Stay away. Don't get it in your wound. Don't let it bite you.
No, for sure not.
Yeah. What if mosquitoes start spreading cordyceps?
Can we not explore that? What if? Can we not go there?
That was the key to it infecting humans. It mutated inside the mosquitoes' bodies. And now, once it gets in humans, it mutates even further and becomes a respiratory disease.
I feel like there's a whole movie inside of you that wants to come out with this.
You know what? I did do a series when I started doing TV originally, where it was 6 episodes of destroying the Earth.
Mm-hmm.
One episode after another.
Each episode was about a different way to destroy the Earth?
Yeah, it was called, it had 2 different names. One name was Evacuate Earth, and the other was called How to Survive the End of the World.
I like it. Is it useful for preppers?
If the Earth were to freeze over, we've given them a formula for survival. But one that we did that was zombie was the rabies virus mutates, the way it mutates is because it's being weaponized by an adversarial nation, not us, in their weapons labs, and it breaks free and infects the world. And, the people infect more people because they're now human biting zombies spreading their, but I think in that case, it might've been a virus, right? What is rabies? It's a virus, right? Rabies virus?
Rabies?
Yeah, that's what I think.
I think it's a virus.
It sounds like the words go together. Rabies virus.
The rabies virus.
Bacteria. Yeah. Right.
The rabies virus.
So, all right.
So back to Does It Fly? So
the vibe.
The vibes. So here's my question. Clearly, we both love this show. Even if it doesn't fly necessarily scientifically, it flies for story. We're in. Yeah. So I guess taking it a step further, right? Does it fly for the vibes? Does it fly for the feels? And I touched on this a little bit earlier, and I want to extrapolate out the idea of we watched this series because it came out in 2023. So whenever you've watched it since that point, it's been watched in a post-pandemic world, a post-COVID world. And I'm curious about your thoughts on, does that fact, the context in which we are experiencing this show, whether you watched it when it first came out or several years later, affect how you feel about it and experience it? Or would it have been experienced differently had we not had this experience of a pandemic?
It's hard to have that objective perspective because I saw it post-pandemic, right? Mm-hmm. So, but I tell you this, the 2 things did merge in my mind.
Yeah. What was your experience? How so?
Well, it's a lot of, sometimes you go to a movie, it brings you into a world and you kind of think you're in that world, or you could be in that world. Right. Like coming out of the Matrix, I was like, am I living in reality? And so coming out of this one, right. Exactly.
I just shook. For those of you listening, I just gave my head an emphatic shake of no.
Yeah. And it's the same way with this one. I went into this and I thought like, holy cow, such an infection could exist. Because here's the thing. Infections have been happening around us all the time anyway. And I have been paying attention going all the way back. I think that in the Clinton presidency, there was something that maybe it was Ebola that I'm thinking about, but I've been, and Jim Gates started talking about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then Jim Gates started talking about it. So the whole idea of pandemics was starting to slowly unroll. They would always harken back to the, flu pandemic in the early 20th century that killed, I think, 20 million people. But then there was a war going on. So that made it spread, World War I. So the question is, could it happen? And so I have in my own lifetime noticed how the population density has rapidly increased, right? And so the idea that, and the other thing is I love studying the transition from being an agricultural species, being a hunter-gatherer species, becoming an agricultural species, having these domestication of animals and how diseases go from animals to humans, but it's the tight density conditions that allow that to spread. And then you add into that, from the bacterial side, overuse of antibiotics that lead to superbacteria. And then we actually have a pandemic that spreads throughout, not just some country way over there, but here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it almost felt like the way people talk about aliens, like, oh yeah, they've been slowly letting us know they exist. Because they're really in orbit. They're going to come down here and, they've been slowly getting us used to the idea. It's almost like they've been slowly getting us used to the idea of pandemics, except for the fact, like, no, homie, bubonic plague, keep going back. You keep getting pandemics. Yeah.
These things have been around for a long time.
They've been around for a long time. And it's this population density and then the close associations of humans and animals. And then, as you penetrate deeper into nature, as permafrost melts and all of these different conditions. So it becomes very realistic to me. And it became at that moment like, whoa, I had to do some research. Could this happen? Immediately. Yeah. And what's going to happen, right? Because it keeps happening, but we keep responding to it. And I think the way we responded to COVID-19 really gave me a lot of faith in humanity's ability to respond to these sorts of things.
Right. And so I think for me, that's kind of the key thing, sort of more on the emotional side. It's the how do we respond to these things, right?
Yeah.
Like when the pandemic happened, what did people prioritize?
Toilet paper.
Yeah, exactly. What became everybody's survival mechanism? Clearly, like so much of what we did, we transferred to an online existence because we couldn't be in physical proximity with each other. But the drive to connect was still there. So as I'm watching The Last of Us, having gone through this experience of a time when you were not supposed to be in physical proximity.
That's a good point.
With people, and this narrative, this story is centered on who can you be near, who can you not be near, how do we protect ourselves and stay safe? Yeah. And obviously, different people had different ideas about that during the pandemic. And so we all internalized that, or at least I will say I internalized that, sort of this fact that people had different ideas. And you see that reflected in this story, in the structures of it, where you have, you've got a quarantine zone, the QZ, that's set up in various cities. It's run by Fedra, which is basically kind of what the military and government have evolved into. It's very strict, it's very tight, it's very authoritarian. In places it's super corrupt. And they are keeping the people safe because this infection is so dangerous. Then you have people who are like, F that. We're not going to follow Fedra. They're corrupt. They're horrible. They're awful. There are places where they've been like raping and pillaging and all kinds of things like that. And they're going to overthrow. Are they able to keep the people safe? That's the big question. And then you have people who have just gone off the grid. And so being able to see that and having gone through a pandemic experience that we've all gone through this together, it felt very real. It felt authentic. I felt it in my bones in a way that maybe I wouldn't have. And then, like I mentioned earlier that I was watching this, at the beginning of the year, as we were experiencing the fires here in LA. And so there was a whole other level of it. One of the things that I love about the show too is all of the sort of artifacts that you see Ellie discover as they go on this road trip, right? And some of the flashbacks too. Like there's a scene where she and her friend basically go to a mall. What is an old abandoned mall? And you see the things that they're both curious about and understand, and then other things that they're, like, what the heck is this? Like,
what is an arcade?
They look at a thong in Victoria's Secret and they're like, why would you wear that? But
that question answers itself.
Yeah. But then also like she's got a comic book, and then they find other comic books, things like that. And what are we'd had this fire experience, thinking, and we made go, like, luckily, like I said, we were never in the path of it, but we did one night, there was a third fire that broke out that was way too close for comfort.
Hollywood Hills one?
The Hollywood Hills one. Yeah, so we packed our go bags. Wow. We each said, okay, there's room for 3 sentimental things. What are the things that are going to mean the most? What are the things that are not replaceable? Right. What are the things you can carry with you? What do you choose to carry?
My telescope.
Yeah, I mean, so because you can also use it as a weapon.
You can use it as a weapon. You can use it as a fire starter. You can use it to see the enemy.
I think you need to check in with the preppers and like put a
Get a telescope in your kit. Yeah. One
so
thing
all of
that
those things, and so yeah, I had a
But
funny
here's a question
I had a
for
funny
you.
question for you. I'll ask it in a minute. Yeah.
the pandemic, it led to living life differently. For example,
Mhm.
greeting rituals, handshake, kiss, hug, right? Those are the human greeting rituals. Suddenly those things took on a completely different character.
Mhm.
So now if you imagine you step out of you've just watched the show and you're like, oh Lord, this could be going on. What do you change, right? There's really nothing. I'm not eating anything that I didn't grow myself. Is that?
Yeah. I mean, it does. I mean, it did make me think about food supply. I mean, here's what
Yeah.
I'll say. Like, it made me think about food supply, which again, I was aware of before. It's not like that was new news to me, which is why it resonated with me to begin with. But especially like in light of like pandemic followed by fires.
Right.
What is the air quality? What is in our soil? Where are things coming from? What is growing? What is
Look,
okay? What is
people
safe?
were washing their mail during the pandemic. So it sounds like if you worry about your food supply, you clean it or you don't use the highly processed stuff, right? So if it's produce.
I will say we washed our groceries for months.
Yeah.
Yeah, we wiped them down. I mean, it was, yeah.
Listen, I took extreme measures. I actually started taking showers.
Oh, Hakeem, I'm so sorry. Are you doing okay with that?
Well, since the pandemic, I don't have to take them anymore. But, during that time period, at least once or twice a month.
And folks, this is why I am very happy that we record the show remotely. But I'm
You're trying to kill me again.
Nobody wants to fly with cordyceps. That said, if we're talking about does the way this show, does it affect us? Does it make us feel something? Does it, bring, it even brings up questions about like what makes us human in a really poignant way. Along the journey, Joel and Ellie meet they're not a father-son, they're a big brother and a son, but essentially like a sort of another pseudo family. And they're a real family, they're brother and anyway, you know what I mean? And the little kid he's 8 or 9, he gets infected. And as soon as he realizes that he's infected, his name is Sam. His character is deaf. He's played by a deaf actor. As soon as he gets infected, he writes a message to Ellie on like one of these write-on wipe-off, toys. And he says, if I get infected, am I still me?
Right. Yeah.
This thing goes deep. So as far as does cordyceps
Your
fly
evil
for the
you.
vibes? Huh?
Your evil you.
Yeah. I would say you're not you anymore. After,
You're not you.
after this.
Right.
No. And that's part of like the tragedy of it.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I would say, does cordyceps fly for the vibes? Does The Last of Us fly for the vibes? Yeah, because it makes us feel all kinds of things.
It absolutely does, and it makes you think all kind of things. So it is flying high.
Absolutely.
And they're shrooms, so of course they are. Is there any psilocybin, psilocybin, you know that word?
Yeah, Slytherin? Oh no, wait, that's Harry Potter.
Slytherin in that particular one, because they be tripping, right? They tripping, that's for sure. So
well, for all of you who would like to microdose with us, there's a new episode. There's a new episode of Doesn't Fly every Friday, where we talk science and story of sci-fi and horror and all things geek. You can find us online at doesitflypod.com, where if there's something we've gone down the rabbit hole on today, our amazing producers will have all kinds of links and things that you can continue exploring this topic with. And where can they find us on social? Where are we at?
Well, first, I want to give a shout out to my hair and makeup team, HMU. All right, I don't have that. But you can find us at doesitflypod.com. You can find us at doesitflypod on your favorite social media. We're on TikTok. We're on Instagram. We're on UBTubi. Okay, it's really YouTube, but I like changing words. Maybe it's
Because Tubi actually is an outlet, so.
That's why I corrected myself. So thank you guys for joining us. It's always a good time. It might be interesting and it might be informative.
All right. You have not seen The Last of Us. We'll see you next time.
Take care.
But